Alright, so in this video, we are going to pick up where we left off, which is right around here. And we're going to talk about how the Allies, the United States, Russia, Britain, France, turn the tides and start to win the war against the Axis powers, Hitler, Italy, and Japan. So up until this point, since Hitler invaded Poland, it was the Axis powers that have been extra aggressive. Hitler invades Poland. Hitler defeats France extremely quickly. Hitler fights the Battle of Britain and is trying to invade Britain for about a year and bombs London for about a year, gives up because the British wouldn't surrender, and then invades the Soviet Union all before the United States even gets involved in the war. Japan is being extra aggressive and expanding its territory in the Pacific. The United States cuts off their oil supplies, and then the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor and kill a lot of American military men and civilians. But the United States then declares war on Japan and kind of recovers much faster than Japan has expected. So that happens in 1941, the very end of it, December 1941, the day that will live in infamy. The year's 1942 is when things finally start to turn around. So the war happens 1939, September 1939 to the end of 1941. Axis are winning. Mid 1942 is when, like summer-ish, is when the Allies start to win. We're going to have some major turning points. So let's talk about the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Germans. Remember, Germany and the Soviet Union had a pact, a non-aggression pact before World War I started, that they would not make war on one another. The British had already broken a lot of the German codes and knew that the Germans were planning to invade the Soviet Union anyways and tried to warn Stalin, but he was paranoid and didn't believe him. And so the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1940 came mostly as a very big surprise. Let me just make sure I have that date right. Oh, 1941. Yep. Came very much as a surprise to Stalin, and you can see how far that the Germans push back the Soviets. So they're losing for a long time in Operation Barbarossa. But by August 1942, so about a year from now, is when the Soviets fight a counterattack. So they attack back. They get pushed all the way back, so they're losing for a long time. But then this attack, June 1942, that's when it starts. That's too late in the year. Because if Hitler is not able to defeat the Soviets quickly, within a month or two, it's going to turn into the Russian winter, which is the same mistake that Napoleon made, especially since they didn't defeat Britain once and for all. So when the Americans join the war, Hitler's going to have to fight a two-front war again. So the Battle of Stalingrad, I can't find it on this map. It should be somewhere around here. He should have went for Moscow or Leningrad. Moscow is the capital. Leningrad is a major industrialized city. It would have been better in a total war to take out one of those two cities. But instead, he takes out Stalingrad, mostly because it's named after Stalin. This is a great example of two totalitarian leaders just going after each other. Hitler versus Stalin. And remember, fascist versus communism. They're inherent enemies, despite both being dictators. And essentially what the Soviets are going to do in mid-1942, in August of 1942, they're going to blitz the Germans back and surprise the Germans. Let's see. Oh yeah, in November, they're going to launch a counterattack and essentially, where's my map of Stalingrad? Trap the Germans within the city of Stalingrad and surround them and force them to surrender during the Russian winter. And remember what Russians do in order to prevent the Germans from taking shelter or eating their food from their farms. They're going to burn down Stalingrad. I believe the majority of the city is just going to be absolutely destroyed to prevent the Germans from surviving the Russian winter. And so by Hitler is going to promote somebody and say, hey, no marshal, no field marshals, no German field marshals ever surrendered, and now you're field marshal, so you better not surrender. And this just dragged on. The German soldiers are going to be all dying. They're going to be half starved. They're going to be dying from frostbite. They're going to be freezing, and eventually the Germans do surrender. So this is the first German surrender at any battle in World War II. Now, it was extremely bloody. It's going to cost the Soviets over 1 million soldiers, and the city of Stalingrad is going to be 99% destroyed. However, after the Battle of Stalingrad, the Germans were now on the defensive, and the Soviets could now start pushing back. So they finally turned the tides. As the Soviets do turn the tides and take back a lot of the territory that the Germans had occupied in Eastern Europe, this isn't a good map. This would be a good map. So the Soviets start to push back and start to take back this territory. They're going to occupy that territory themselves. They're not liberating the territory from the Germans. They're just replacing the former dictator with a new dictator. Pretty much just as terrible. Almost to get back at the Germans. And so we're on the Russian side. We're on the side of the USSR. And they're going to start to push back this way, as we'll talk about D-Day in just a second, as the British, the French, the Americans, the Canadians push back this way. And it's going to be a race of who's going to defeat Germany first. Who's going to get to Berlin first, the Soviets or the democracies? But let's keep going on. Let's talk a little bit about the Allied advance. We're going to see, this is just a picture of, we're going to see the Italians are going to be defeated once and for all by the British in Africa. And Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to be the American general. He's known as being an incredible planner. He thinks of everything. And he's going to be one of the leaders of D-Day. I'll get to D-Day in a second, but I do want to talk about Japan is going to start to turn the Pacific Theater, the Allies are going to start to turn the tide on the Japanese. At the same time, the Allies are turning the tide on the Germans in Europe. So the Battle of Midway was one of those turning points in the Pacific. So let me do this real quick. Let's see. All right, so Hawaii, as we talked about last time, is right here. This is Pearl Harbor and the Hawaiian Islands. And then this is Midway. Midway, it's called the Battle of Midway because it's an island that's midway between Asia and the United States. And at the Battle of Midway, let me see, the Allies broke one of the Japanese codes. And they knew that the Japanese were calling, they knew the code for the island Midway that was going through the radios. And so what the Allies did is they set up an ambush, essentially. They tested out the code, and I think the code was AF. That's what they were using over the radio. And they put out into the radio, because everyone can hear it at this time period. They put out, hey, AF is running out of water. From like one American to another American. The Japanese they say Midway is running out of water. The Japanese hear that, and they say to somebody else, from one Japanese to another, hey, AF is running out of water. And so that's confirmation that they know this this code name. And so what they essentially do is they pretend like they're vulnerable. The Japanese come and they are about to attack this island, only for the Allies to be just waiting to attack them back from the backside of them. And essentially they take this island. June 1942. So right around the same time period of the summer of 1942, when the Soviets start to push back and defeat the Germans at Stalingrad. Summer, fall-ish, right? The biggest general at this time period is General MacArthur. He comes up with the idea, or really successfully is a very successful general in this arena. And what the Allies decide to do is they decide to do this tactic called island hopping. It's where you, instead of going after every single island chain and trying to take them back one by one, you hop from one island to the next, and if you can control these two islands, then all the islands in between are cut off from supplies from the Japanese. And so it's a lot less fighting, and it's more efficient, and it's faster. So the goal of the Allies at this point in time is to take back all this territory and cut it off from the Japanese. And they're very successful at doing it. The Battle of the Midway is really the first major defeat of the Japanese. And from here, they just start to hop, an island hop, and they're getting closer and closer to Japan. They really turn the tides on the Japanese, and the Allies start to win the war in the Pacific. They're already starting to win the war in Europe after the Battle of Stalingrad. So now let's talk about the most famous battle, which is called D-Day. D-Day, June 6th, 1914. This is the battle in Saving Private Ryan that you often see in the movies that portray World War II. The British and the Americans, they decide to open up a second front and try to invade Europe and then eventually invade Germany. And they decided to have a joint command. So Dwight D. Eisenhower is one of the generals that really helped plan the invasion of D-Day. The idea of D-Day it was called an amphibious attack, meaning you're coming from the water. And it's hard. It's very hard to run a successful amphibious attack because the enemy can see you from a mile away. And so what they decide to do is they leave London and they show up on the shores of Normandy, which isn't the best idea. If you could imagine, the best place to invade is Calais, right here in France, because it's the shortest. But that's kind of where the general, the Germans felt like they would invade. So a lot of their forces were stationed right over here. And then instead they attacked Normandy, France in 1944. After a couple years, it's already starting to turn the tide. And this was the largest sea invasion at this time period. They had to develop new types of boats that could land on the beaches. They had parachute people kind of dropped behind the German lines. Up on this coast are all of the Germans just sitting in the cliffs with their machine guns. So they set up all these booby traps, and essentially the Americans, the British, the Allies were coming via water and storming the beaches and trying to overtake all of the Germans and all of the Axis powers who were just sitting there with machine guns, shooting them down. They're sitting ducks. And if you're the first one on those beaches, it's a suicide mission. But eventually a couple people are going to be let through. And if you have enough people come, you're going to be able to overtake them. And so you can see on this, so this is England. This is where they're coming from. And then Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. These are the code name beaches where they're planning to land. And they're going to have some paratroopers come and and attack the Germans from behind. It was this huge planning. They had to time it with the tides to make sure the water was high enough in so they weren't running for too long. It was extremely, extremely hard to plan. Omaha Beach is the beach that we see in the movies. For a lot of the other beaches, they were quite successful because they were just so well planned out, and the death toll wasn't as high. At Omaha Beach, everything that could have went wrong went wrong. They had these floating tanks that kind of floated too far back or just sank because they weren't released soon enough. And you had the tide push people off, so they were kind of attacking the wrong spots. And the death toll at Omaha Beach was incredibly, incredibly high. They do eventually take it over, but it was one of those heroic defeats that was just also tragic because of so much death. After D-Day, we're going to see, you don't have to write down Battle of the Bulge, you're going to see one last offensive. They just keep sending more and more and more people. Even a month after D-Day, they send another couple thousand troops through this channel. And you can see they're going to start to push into Germany. And what we're going to see in the Battle of the Bulge, generally, like, the Germans are pushing back and there's a line. If you can force a bulge of the German line, then you can, like this right here, then you have them surrounded on three sides. And you can attack them from there. And essentially that was the last major offensive. And at this time period, while the Allies, such as England, France, America, are pushing towards Berlin, Germany, we're also seeing the Soviets come from the other side after the Battle of Stalingrad, and it's a race to see who can defeat Germany the quickest. Because even though the Soviets are on our side, they're not necessarily our friends. They're just our allies. And whoever, deals the final blow to Hitler, essentially, they're hoping they will have more power come the end of World War II. So VE Day stands for Victory in Europe Day. 5/7, so January, February, March, May 7th, 1945. At this point in time, the German squeeze has been successful. Germany and Berlin is surrounded on all sides by the Allies, and Hitler was afraid of, being paraded around and being humiliated as the loser of World War II. That one of the last things he does is he marries his longtime mistress, and they decide to commit suicide together by taking cyanide pills, which is poison. And just for good measure, Hitler shot himself. At this point in time, Germany is clearly defeated. Unlike World War I, where Germany is signing this armistice, well, they're still occupying different parts of Europe. At this point in time, Germany's all stuck in Germany. They're surrounded, and it's a clear, decisive victory. There's no arguing that Germany has lost this war. The body of Hitler is actually found by the Soviets, and Stalin was afraid Hitler would be used as a martyr, so he took his remains back to the Soviet Union and never admitted that they had him. Everyone thought that the Soviet Union did, but they didn't. And they also, Mussolini is also defeated, and he dies at the end of this as well. And so about a year after D-Day, almost an exact year after D-Day, Germany is completely defeated. All right, so let's keep going. So we talked about the Battle of Midway already. This is happening in 1942. And after the Battle of Midway, we just keep seeing them hop and hop. And the last two places that they go are Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Those islands are extremely close. They're the last islands to get to Japan. And this is the island hopping chain and strategy and path that the Allies took. And the question now stands is, Europe has already defeated Germany. Japan is the last one standing, and Japan still has this feudalistic mindset of a warrior. You never surrender. And so, as the Allies were getting closer and closer, the battles were getting bloodier and bloodier, and the Japanese had within their culture that you never surrender. So this is the time period where you're starting to see the kamikaze pilots, who were a pilot that just dives into an enemy ship knowing that it was a suicide mission. They are not going to give up. And Truman has to make a decision. The decision is, should we invade? They have two options: invade Japan, which is going to cause so much more death as well. If these islands are causing a lot of death, the invasion of Japan will cause a ton of casualties. And so what they decide to do is, Truman decides maybe we could save some lives if we instead bomb Japan. And the United States had this thing called the Manhattan Project going for a while. The Manhattan Project, where is it in my notes? Was extremely expensive. Some historians even say, there's almost always a 100% chance that these bombs were going to be used just to justify the cost of developing them. But these bombs, they were always meant to be used against the Nazis. And the Nazis were already defeated at this point. And so, at this point in time, these bombs, these atomic bombs, there wasn't a strong understanding of radioactivity and the illness that it will cause afterwards. They knew that these bombs would be huge and destructive. But to them, it was in a total war. Like, the Allies and the Axis powers have been firebombing and dropping bombs on other people's cities all war. So they just figured this was just another really big bomb. Nothing that out of the ordinary, or that different than anything they've ever seen before. Dropping bombs on civilians. And so that's just the total war mindset, that it's really easy to criticize right now, but that's the mindset that they had throughout this war. And that's why they were so ready to use them. And so some historians argue that Truman made that decision almost to bomb Japan rather than invade Japan. If you bomb them, maybe they will surrender, and maybe it will definitely kill some people, but it might kill less people than if we invaded. I think the true debate is, was it even necessary to bomb or invade them? Could we have negotiated a peace, a surrender, rather than just require Japan's unconditional surrender, such as allowing them to keep their emperor as a constitutional monarchy, which is eventually what we allowed them to do anyways. But the Japanese culture just would not surrender because we were requiring an unconditional 100% surrender. No guarantees of anything after the war. And we bombed the city of Hiroshima first, which is right here. And if you were ground zero, right where the bomb hit, you were incinerated. No bone, no skin, no nothing left over. You were just gone. And then everywhere around it was complete destruction and a ton of radioactivity. After the first bomb of Hiroshima, it destroys the city, and Japan still did not surrender at all. And so they bombed and decided to use a second one, Nagasaki. And the second bomb is much harder to defend. It's much more controversial. Did we really need to do the second bomb in order to require the Japanese surrender? You could argue that the second bomb was unnecessary. But even after both bombs, the military was not ready to give up. It was only the emperor intervening. the Japanese emperor who was seen as like a holy figure, he gave a recorded speech and essentially convinced people that it was time to surrender. Um, and because of these bombs, these militarists, these Japanese militarists, were completely discredited. War is not the right answer, and no one will ever want to fight a war like this ever again. So 9 to 45, so a couple months, about 5 months after VE Day, sometimes people call it VJ Day, defeat of Japan, will happen about 5 months later. So the results. Europe is in ruins. Civilians have been targeted this entire time. The soldiers are, so many killed, so many wounded. There's all these agricultural farms that are completely destroyed. It's going to take Europe a long, long time to rebuild. Except the United States. We rebuild, of course, and it can recover from one bombing of Pearl Harbor, which was harmful and thousands of people died. But next to Europe, we weren't destroyed. We are going to help rebuild Europe's agriculture and industry in return for their conversion to democracy and capitalism. And that's going to kind of create the world fighting between the Soviets, communists, and the United States democracy. We're also going to see war crime trials. The most notable, the Nuremberg war trials. At this point in time, there was this agreement that a war crime is a war crime. It doesn't matter if you were just following orders. If you decide to use chemical gas on someone just because Hitler or Stalin told you to, you are still responsible. And that sets a very important precedent for the future. We will get to this stuff next class, during the Cold War. I'm not going to go over this right now. But essentially, we are going to see the Cold War take place after this. And we're going to see the United Nations. I do want you to write the United Nations. Unlike after World War I, where the United States did not join the League of Nations, the United States will not make that same mistake again and will join the United Nations, which was a peacekeeping organization, an organization where people can belong to it and agree to have diplomacy and talk about their issues rather than go to war. Because nobody's going to want to fight another war like this again. All right, so if I were you, I would go back and make sure to do the timeline that we are working on and maybe even put it on our plot diagram, some of these different days, so that you can keep it all straight. But we will review a little bit, but essentially that is it. That's it. And make sure you start studying your materials. Thank you very much, and start studying for the test.